Good afternoon, Everett residents. We are here today for the Budget Committee of the Everett City Council. The date is Wednesday, May 25th, 2022, and we'll call to order. Thank you all for being here today, and I'm going to, without further ado, hand it over to Susie Haugen, the Finance Director for the city, to take us through some presentation slides. Hi, Susie.
Well, hi, good afternoon, and good to see you all on Zoom. I do have a few slides to run through with you today, and if you'll bear with me, I will share my screen and we will get started. And that should be displayed now, I believe. Great. Yes. So we will start this afternoon with a deficit forecast because there's been a small change. The estimated 2021 budget variance available for balancing the 2023 budget has been updated to $5.7 million. That number may still change slightly due to any really last minute accounting entries. I don't really anticipate that it will, but I do want to caution that it's still possible. But at any rate, there wouldn't be any major changes after this point. And so that brings the gap that we'll be working to close to just under $8.4 million. We're leaving the budget variance estimate at $7 million for each year thereafter. In consideration of the large number of vacancies that we're still carrying, we added, as you recall, another 8 police officer positions last year, and filling police vacancies is challenging. So we still think that looking out into the future beyond 2023, that we probably it's reasonable to include that $7 million of carry forward estimate. But we do look at that every year along with all the other assumptions in our forecast. So we will update that as we need to. And as you know, the primary driver of our structural deficit is that 1% limit on property taxes. Restricting 1/3 of the general government's revenues to 1% means that our resources just don't keep pace with the cost of delivering public services, and particularly in times of high inflation like we're experiencing now. This chart shows the declining purchasing power of one property tax dollar from the year 2000 through an estimate for 2022. We use the June to June CPI for Seattle, Bellevue, and Tacoma. That is the CPI index measure that is included in most of our contracts. And so it's the relevant one for us. And as you can see, for 2022, once we get that update, that the value of that dollar drops to only 68 cents. And so the problem continues. And next, I would like to go over some city comparisons. These next few slides compare the city of Everett with other cities in Snomish County that have populations greater than 10,000. So as we know, Everett's the county seat and also the largest city, both in population and in geographic areas served. At 112,000, Everett's population is 37% higher than Marysville's, which is the second largest city, and 2.5 times higher than the average of this group. In square miles, Everett serves an area that is 57% larger than Marysville and 83% larger than the average of this group. So as a full service city, Everett has significantly more people and ground to cover, both of which requires adequate funding. So as I just mentioned, Everett is a full service city, which makes it difficult to compare us with other cities that have divested responsibility for one or more core services. In order to establish a better base for this comparison, I assembled what I'm referring to as core services levy rates, which include regular levies, levies for EMS services, levies for fire services, and snow aisle libraries, in trying to put us on a level playing field with the other cities. And as you can see, Everett's core services levy rate is in the middle to lower end of this group of city comparables.
Susie, do any of these cities have parks levy or municipal park districts or other taxing authorities for their parks?
No.
Okay, but if they did, group, you would include that in core services, wouldn't you?
I would, and
okay.
I think actually that Bothell does. The only reason why Bothell is not on this list is because it's half in King County and half in Snomish County. So trying to cobble the information together in a meaningful way, as easily as it is when everybody's in Snomish County, I couldn't do, but or I didn't have time to do. So that's the only city that's omitted from this group of comparables that's over 10,000. But yeah, these cities only have regular city levies, EMS levies, fire service levies, and snow aisle. So next, we'll translate that levy rate into what the average value residential homeowner pays for core services in 2022. The average home values are identified in the Snomish County Assessor's Annual Report. And if we look at the chart on the left, Everett's owner of an average value residential property pays less for core services than any other city in this group. You know, and I understand that there are probably a lot of varying opinions on appropriate tax rates. However, tax rates that are so low that they don't cover the cost of basic services can have a negative impact on the community as important services erode over time due to lack of funding. And now we'll take a look at the 2022 budget priorities. We began organizing the budget on priority basis in the 2020 budget in an effort to better communicate how the city allocates and spends its resources. The priorities are built on a foundation of responsive and responsible government. It includes activities that ensure we are good stewards of our resources and that we deliver essential services efficiently. Public safety has long been a top priority for the city and supported by our community. The goal is to fund services that help people feel safe anytime and anywhere, and foster a community that is inclusive and welcoming to people of all backgrounds and beliefs. Next, we have housing, transportation, and infrastructure. This priority funds activities that work towards ensuring that there is a wide range of quality housing available in Everett at all price points, and that people and goods can move freely within and through Everett. The economic, workforce, and cultural vitality priority focuses on positioning Everett as a preferred location where businesses find a ready workforce and wonderful amenities to help attract and retain employees. And finally, we have engaged and informed community. Activities funded in this priority focus on connecting community members with one another and encouraging them to engage in civic life using technology and our rich community networks. So this is how the dollars were distributed among the priorities in the 2022 original budget. We have public safety receiving more than half of the budget at $86.8 million. Responsive and responsible government is next with $31.6 million or 20%. Economic and cultural vitality was allocated $16.9 million or 11%. Housing, transportation, and infrastructure, $15.3 million or 10%, and engage and inform community with $4.7 million completes that distribution. And I would love to open it up at this point for discussion of the priorities or any of the comparative slides that we just went over.
Let's see, Councilmember Schwab, Councilmember Tweed, yes. Do you have any questions? We'll start with Councilmember Schwab.
Okay, thank you. One thing I wanted to just briefly mention that one thing in here is we didn't add sales tax. My understanding that we have one of the lower sales tax in Snomish County. Is that correct?
Yes, not the lowest,
But
we're not the highest.
I would just, as you're showing comparisons to other cities, I just think it's important to note that our sales tax is also lower than other comparable cities.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. And then transportation, as far as the busing and the transit system, how does that equate as far as compared to other cities? Did you look at that at all?
Well, we were focusing here on the general government, and our transit agency is an enterprise fund,
right? So
funded outside of the general government. We are the only city that has its own transit agency. Other cities are served by community transit
and
in Snomish County.
Yeah, I just want to make the point that our transit service doesn't put any more pressure on our levy rate.
They do not receive property tax.
Yes.
Correct.
This is actually some of the questions that some of my neighbors have asked about the busing service, and it's not part of our levy rate, so it's self-funded in that aspect.
Yes.
Is that all, Councilmember Schwab?
I guess I just wanted to make a point there about obviously we're going to be having discussion about 2023. And if you go to slide 2, we're talking about a pretty big deficit. I take it at some point we're going to have a discussion on how to I guess I should say eliminate that gap.
That's the work that we do annually. Right. And I think the challenge, as we all know, is that the economy is weighing heavily really on all of us. Mm-hmm. So staff are continuing to consider revenue options and come back to council or to this budget committee very soon. But I guess I can't overemphasize the concern we have about the economy right now.
Right. I'm very concerned about, obviously that's going to be in the short term for next year, but long term, we're looking at continuing challenges to, I guess, zero out that gap. One other thing too here if you put on slide 3, for those who might be viewing, we're talking about purchasing power. And you did a 2022 estimate, you used inflation numbers.
Yes,
if you even use the most conservative projections for 2023, that was still going to drop a large amount as far as purchasing power.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, I noticed you didn't put that in here, but our purchasing power is going to drop by another. I'll just be conservative and say 6%. As far as our purchasing power, I just think can't be emphasized enough. Thank you.
Yes, inflation has been incredibly high for the past year. And we all know that the Federal Reserve is working hard to slow that rate of inflation, but we're still running at a very high pace.
I just had one or two more things. One was the sales tax. Are we continuing to see a flat or a percent higher in the revenue from sales tax?
Sales tax is actually doing fairly well this year. We are exceeding budget. We did receive a large audit recovery this year in sales tax that is driving some of those numbers. But even aside from that, we'd still be over budget. So those are good numbers coming in. Not all of our taxes are faring that well, and I should have the April monthly report out to you before the end of the week. So you'll get a full rundown on those.
Yeah, and I just for this meeting, I can't emphasize enough. If you go back and look at during inflationary times, their spending does slow down once once individuals, families, people realize that their same habits of spending has to change, because they're spending more for the same amount. That I would expect, if not a drop, at least a flat in those sales tax revenues at some point.
Yeah, and we do watch them very closely by industry sector, and so they've been propped up for a few reasons. The shift to online sales really supports Everett because we're keeping our own tax base. The all of the federal stimulus, which gave people additional disposable income to spend, I think has been supporting our sales tax as well. So now that those stimulus programs, I don't see any additional, where the individuals are getting checks from the federal government. I haven't heard of any in the future. So we'll have to see how that is winding down. Through April, our results are good. I will say that, but certainly looking towards the future, we would certainly, especially with the ratcheting up of interest rates that the Fed is doing, and in response to inflation, that will certainly impact people's ability to spend as well.
Well, I think in the short term, sales tax, increase in sales tax is going to be helpful for the 2023 budget. But beyond that, I do not expect it to help whatsoever. It's not, and I can see that the gap that we need to fill is, even with increased sales tax, is still not even close to where we need to be 1 or 2 years from now.
Absolutely.
Not great news right now.
No.
Definitely not.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schwab. Councilmember Tui, questions from you.
Council President. So Susie, thank you. I think it's always really important that we have these comparisons at our fingertips as a council member, and I really appreciate it. The sales tax percent would be nice to have at our fingertips too. It's just, you forget all the numbers and where we sit in relationship to our neighbors. And I think that's such a very important message for council members and for us when we talk to our neighbors and everything. So thank you for all that. So I know with the ARPA funds, we were able to do some, I can't remember exactly what it is, but with the planning department, we were able to make a purchase, or we're purchasing software to put everything online, which is what I count as a real efficiency move that in the long term should give us better customer service, plus hopefully maybe even be less costly as far as manpowers and processing things. And I just wonder if there are a few other things that we can look at that we could use with ARPA funds that might really benefit some of our departments. I know Councilmember Stonecipher was talking about an onboard system for HR that is very helpful and reduces a lot of time and effort. And so as we look to the future, if we're not able to really come up with a lot of revenue, at least we can maybe minimize some of the operational impacts some of our programs have, if there are other things like that that we can look at. And I, of course, am not an expert on any of that, but I'm sure there might be a few, and I'm glad to see that we're doing the planning department. And on that same note, I know over the years, we've really been adjusting our fees that hadn't been adjusted when we first started, I don't know what, back in 2015 or 16. So, and, that might be a question, especially with all the new council members, just to have, to kind of show where we sit with our fees so that they see that we're not under, way under like we were a while back, and that we're working on keeping those adjusted annually, or whatever the plan is. Those are just like small little things, but anyway, I just always like to have those things in the back of my mind because it makes it easier when you talk to people about our budget and the crisis that we have and what we can and can't do. So
yeah, I can certainly get you, all of you, the sales tax comparison so that you can see where we sit with other Snomish County cities.
That'd be great.
And, in terms of the fees, we've been working hard with all of our fees to either bring them back to council annually or put them on an automated CPI growth basis. So the ordinances that establish them, if they're tied to CPI, then staff just adjusts them annually based on the growth in inflation. And that's kind of just nudges them up very little bits at a time, but it keeps them current. So that really has been an efficient way to do that. We have a couple of other fees that are done on either an annual or every other year basis reviewed. But we've really worked hard since the conversations we had, as you mentioned, back in 2014, 2015, to really move our fees towards a more consistent basis like that.
All I have, but thanks, Susie, and appreciate all the comparisons. I think that's comparison handbook is what we need.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Toohey. So Susie, for my questions, I guess the first question I have is really kind of back at the beginning and wondering why we're using those just Snohomish County cities for our comparisons. Because they look like they aren't very comparable to us. And when we did the Burke study back in 2018, they identified a set of cities that had similar population and square footage that they were covering and population density. And I'm just curious why we aren't using that comparison group.
Well, I can certainly update those comparisons with the peer cities identified for the Burke study. That would not be a problem. Choosing Snohomish County because this is the region that we're in, and these are our neighbors. And so people that own a home in Everett, this is how they compare to their neighbors in Marysville or their neighbors in Arlington. So it was done more Snohomish County centric for that view, and because they are our closest neighbors.
Yeah, and I just worry that might be distorting things. So for example, we look at the levy rate for core, or let me see, what graph was I looking at? The property tax paid for core services. And, obviously we're on the low end, but because all those other cities are so much smaller, we should be on the low end because we're able to achieve economies of scale in our services in a way that a smaller city is not able to do. So I just worry that we might not be getting actionable information to say, oh, it's okay. Because as I recall, and I'm trying to look through the Burke study, I'm sitting here, I can't remember, but I think our property taxes were lower, but we were, like our sales tax was actually higher than other cities that were more comparable to us. And so there were lots of areas where we saw that our operations, when you looked at a city that was similar in size, was, just we were in better shape in some areas and worse shape in others that we might not get when we look and compare against small cities like the ones we're looking at.
Well, yeah, there are a lot of elements to look at. There certainly should be economies of scale that you get with a larger area, but there are also more intense needs that come with being a county seat.
Yeah, true.
So our workloads, and I did start on a police and fire call comparison slides to show today, and unfortunately I didn't feel confident in I was getting mixed data. So I wasn't ready to show it to you yet, but I am working on that one. I just needed more time because it's a very interesting calls per capita police, calls per capita fire. And again, when you look at the Burke study, we're comparing ourselves to cities that either don't have their fire service anymore, or, you know, we're the full service city. And that was the reason why our property tax was higher than most of them. And so what I attempted to do here is take these other cities who have also divested their services and try to put them on a level playing field with Everett, because they, you know, where I brought in the fire service levy and I brought in the snow aisle levy and so on. So to put us on a more level playing field. So I could attempt to do that same thing for those other cities.
It might be, I'd be curious to see how we would fare against that. And then the other thing is we're thinking about, you know, obviously we have to think about revenue because we're falling into the ditch here like crazy. And so there were several, I don't know that they were recommendations or maybe just observations in the Burke study. And, you know, a couple that I always remember are like other cities levy their B&O tax differently across different industries. And I think we still just have a flat B&O tax, same for everyone, other than we did change it for smaller businesses. And so I thought that, you know, those are the kinds of interesting things. You know, we didn't have at the time when Burke did their work, we weren't doing a parks impact fee. And I know we're looking at, you know, adding that now. We weren't, you know, we had a few other areas. I'd be curious to know what, as you are coming back to help us set a budget, what are there any things that were recommended that other cities of our size are doing that you could say, hey, we really need to look at this kind of makes sense? And then probably we would want to look at what does that do to the overall tax burden for our community in terms of different groups. And I know we've done a good job of looking at that, like how much tax does our average property owner pay? So,
you know, as you mentioned, we've done some of the implementation of those things. We've increased our traffic mitigation fees to make them commensurate, or at least sort of midway with the other cities in our area. And we've adopted the park impact fees. However, they're not active until I think July 1st. And they start in at 50%, and then by next year they'll be at the full rate that council adopted. So those are set in place. They're coming. They're just not quite here yet. So we've done that. We've again looked at our fees and you know, tried to get them on a path where they are just sort of automatically keep pace with inflation. Most of them, and the others are absolutely looked at at least every year, or maybe every other year at the most. So I think we've done a lot of that. We have not done anything with our B&O tax rate. There is capacity there you can set different rates for different industry sectors. So, you know, we have retail, wholesale, service, manufacturing. So, you know, we can set different tax rates for those. If council chooses, it's a councilmanic decision, actually. It's an ordinance that would come with a referendum. So, you know, if the public chose to, they could object to changes in that.
Got it.
And, but that's really about it, other than divesting. You know, I think the core of that Burke study was about divesting services.
Yeah.
As you probably recall. So.
Yeah, and we've looked at that and just kind of run into, you know, barriers to doing that in the short term, I guess.
Short term,
yeah. Okay. Well, I guess for my part, I would like to see this other city group sort of with this same analysis, just so I can get my head around, are we looking different? Are we looking at the right information? Because a lot of those cities are just so much smaller than us and don't have things. But I like your idea of looking at the core services, and I don't know how difficult it will be to get that for those other cities.
Yeah, I haven't looked at King counties. I think that, well, not every one of them is in King County. We have Spokane Valley and Yakima. So it depends on how the assessors in those areas prepare their annual report.
Their information.
Our annual report here in Snomish County is actually quite rich, I think, in information. And so hopefully I will find the same thing in those areas. I can't promise that I will, but I'll do my best.
Well, and if this, I mean, I don't know about Spokane Valley and Yakima. If those two are not, they are on the other side of the mountains and may have different properties. But I think the ones in the metro, King County, Snomish County metro area would likely be very similar. I mean, I think one of them is Auburn or Renton, right?
We have Renton, Kent, Auburn, Federal Way, and Kirkland, I believe.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how we look against them as well.
Okay.
And so,
Council President Stonecipher, can I just add one thing? Yes. And Susie, feel free to share more or correct. But with the park impact fees, I think it's good for anyone listening to know that really the intention behind park impact fees is for growth to pay for growth. And so the ability to impact positively the structural deficit with park impact fees is not, I guess I'm thinking it's not significant. Susie, would you agree with that?
Yeah, actually, it is restricted, the revenues from park impact fees as well as traffic mitigation fees. Is we need to use those on projects that provide for growth. So they'd be to expand our park system or expand our street system in some way. So even if it's like wider streets or something that helps, helps with additional traffic. So those all needed things, certainly.
Right.
As we have growth, we need to build for it. So it's good to have those fees to help us do that.
And to the extent that we would have to put that in the general fund budget, if we didn't have those impact fees, it does relieve, it shifts funds back into the general fund budget that we would normally have to allocate to those things if we didn't have the impact fees. But of course we haven't done a lot of park growth, so we we're not probably saving anything out of the general government budget for that at this point.
Right.
Okay, well, this is not the best news to be sure. So where are we in our budget process, Susie? And in terms of, we've obviously, with the economy where it is, we won't be asking taxpayers for any major new revenue sources at this point. Where do we go from here?
Well, we proceed on our normal process where we obviously will be reforecasting all of our assumptions, our labor assumptions, our revenue assumptions. We go through it in great detail starting next month. We have the budget packets out to departments, getting them going on building their material to send back to us. And then we're just taking a deep dive, and there will be decisions that need to be made on how our limited resources will be allocated in 2023.
And so as we send those things to departments, have we put like a freeze on M&A, or what are the directions to those department directors? Are they just being asked to identify areas where they could cut? And we still have $8 million to find.
Yeah, at this point, the information we've sent out is their employee budget system packets to verify and correct as needed. They are there to build their cost allocation plans. So as you know, general fund allocates costs out to non-gen, and as well, non-general government allocates costs back to us, as you know, in terms of rent and other support they might provide. So that's a big effort. There are smaller revenues that departments will submit forecasts to us that we will review. Things like you know, the municipal court fees and you know, little line items like that. In the meantime, we like to get our revenues in through June before we take the deep dive in reforecasting. Gives us yet one more month in.
Yeah.
We'll get the June to June CPI in July, mid-July. And so that'll determine a few things. We have 5 contracts that are up this year for negotiations.
Yeah.
So HR is going to be doing some really heavy lifting on that. A bright spot thus far has been our health benefits. That program has been running well, and this committee will be getting an update on that. I think we've got that scheduled for early December, but it's just a matter of understanding where we are and whatever revenue changes we put in terms of forecast changes, and then any expenditure updates. We'll have a labor forecast update, and it's everything will be looked at, everything.
Yeah. Okay. And to be clear, a freeze on M&O means a budget reduction, because we're looking at inflation of 8%.
Practically speaking, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, any further questions? I see Don has his hand up. Councilmember Schwab, my apologies.
I'm not trying to clap my hand there. I just couldn't actually do well with my memes, evidently. Actually, on the contrary, it's really not good news. If you want to take inflationary factors and a running deficit, it seems to me that we're going to be cutting. I just don't know how we can do this without cutting services. I mean, we had already one presentation from our reviewing our capital improvement projects. We really have depleted the revenue that we put towards those things. Long term, it's going to cost us. It seems like that we've done a lot of belt tightening over the years, and with the inflationary pressures, it seems to be putting even a tighter belt. I'm just very concerned right now that it doesn't seem like we're in a position right now to raise the revenues of the tax levy this year. I'm just very concerned about what that's going to look like when we start talking about revenue shortfalls. So I would hope this committee and the council will consider, if not this year, that we should be prepared to, I know it's not great news for people that live in Everett, but we are getting a relatively fair deal out of our city and how it's managed as far as the costs. And I just think being responsible, we're going to have to look at raising that levy lid in the future. Evidently not this year, but we certainly need to start looking at it for next year, because it's going to take a year. I mean, even if we had some sort of levy lid in April, we still wouldn't see the results until the beginning of 2024. So we're already looking at cutting services this year. we can't borrow money for the services costs in 2024, although we'll see some increases in that first quarter or so. So we're looking at 2 years really of having to cut a lot of corners that we don't have. So I know it's a tough position to be in. Nobody wants to raise taxes on anybody. I mean, with my 30 years in the fire service, working for the city, I know that the last 2 decades, the city of Everett's been very responsible in its spending. For those maybe in the public that are listening, you know, we want to pay fair wages to our employees. It's almost out of necessity just to compete. And so we give, you know, 80% of our budget is personnel. Is that correct, Susie, about?
Closer to 70, but yeah, it's quite high.
70%, we increase a fair cost of living, which is below CPI. Say, let's just throw out a number of 4.5%, and our revenues only go up 1%. We're just running out of places to cut. So I hate to be the dark rain cloud here, but I think when it comes to budget processing, this is we're in a very difficult situation. And hats off to Susie's team over the years, even Lori over in Parks, now, you know, over in the mayor's staff. You guys have done a fantastic job. It just seems like we have some unpopular decisions perhaps, or some tough decisions, but responsible decisions to make. I'm sorry to rant a little much, but if anyone's watching this, and our neighbors, I just want you to know that the staff and the council, we've done everything we can to keep costs under control. And we want to provide a better service, and we want to maintain services. But what we're doing right now just isn't enough. So it's going to be a tough year.
Is there any thinking about revisiting, for example, the municipal parks district idea? Is that just, is that something that even in a time of inflationary pressures that people kind of understand what that means and would be willing to support, you know, our park system? Would relieve some burden off of the general fund?
You know, as we looked at the historical ballot measures, I think I sent out some analysis on those. The MPDs, or Metropolitan Parks districts, have not been enormously successful in the ballot. They've passed in a few communities, and typically what we've seen on those, and Lori, I know you've done a lot of research on this from your parks role, but it seems to me that a lot of them are mainly committed towards capital, which right now we fund primarily our parks capital out of REIT money. REIT is a big share of that, and some CIP4 money. But Lori, I don't know if you'd have any other insight to add from your.
Well, I would only say both the two that I think I'm aware of most recently, Seattle, but that was, gosh, probably 6 years ago now, and Olympia, both elected to commit a certain amount of general fund contribution to their departments. And the districting then went above and beyond that. One of them did it by a percentage of the city budget. Another one did it by just a flat dollar, I believe, a dollar amount, if I'm remembering correctly. So, yeah. So to Susie's point, I think the idea of kind of the RFA model working in parks, we're a little bit more concerned about, I think. And then I think the big picture is still with the economic picture right now. I think there's still, you know, we still carry a high level of concern about whether this is the right time to be hoping for additional revenue. But yeah, I think all of that we're still talking about and thinking about, and I know council is too.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, with all that depressing note, we'll get through it. We've been through the ringer before.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Susie's right. You know, this is the time where we start seeing the revenue projections coming in, and from our departments, and roll up our sleeves on the expense side, and we'll be doing that again. And I'm sure having a lot of conversations with council about that over the next several months.
Sounds good. Any last questions from Councilmember Schwab or Tui?
Yeah, I just had another comment or question. At some point, I would like to see the cuts that we have to make for this budget, what that would look like if there was a levy lid lift. I know we're not going to, evidently it doesn't look like we're going to have one, but what would that cost without those cuts? Just as kind of a comparison. I think the actual homeowner, if they actually knew what a small increase in a levy lid would cost, it's compared to the school district levy, it's really a small amount. I'd really like to at least have that conversation. At least those that are watching these, just have a lot of time to think about what the costs are for a levy lid increase, what that would look like. And I also think that, I mean, at some point, I think those that live in Everett are going to start seeing some of the results of what we're doing here. I think we've seen them in the pool closure, mostly in parks. Yeah, I think
as the grass grows, you're going to start getting those calls.
I know we've done some very creative things. Sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I do think we should be open and honest about some of the things we're doing with our. I don't mean honest, I mean transparent. That this is actually what we're going to have to cut, and there are costs associated with not raising taxes this year. So anyway, I just wanted to, if there's some way that we can kind of ongoing process, just maybe like comparison of what we've had to give up. I mean, when we just don't put money in a capital improvement project, we don't see that right away, but long-term, it will be more expensive to deal with. So I just feel I think that we have insulated those that live in Everett are from a lot of these cuts by not hiring employees. I mean, there just hasn't been a lot of visibility because of all the hard work. So at some point, things are going to become visible. And I really think we should turn the corner on this before the deficits get any bigger.
Good thoughts. Okay. Any final questions or comments? When's our next meeting scheduled?
I think
TBD.
Yeah, it is. I think it is TBD. We certainly can work with you as the chair of this committee to determine when it makes sense to have our next budget committee meeting.
Okay. We'll work on that and get forward. There were a few items requested here, so we'll pull that stuff together. And we have no other business on our agenda, so I believe it is time for us to adjourn.